I spent way too much time today reading comments from, watching videos from, arguing with folks online who are also on the left, who felt that No King's Day was performative and useless. And I just want to encourage myself and anybody watching this video that maybe we need to set some limits to the amount of engagement we want to do with people like that. I think it's very, very, very easy to waste a ton of time and get very frustrated and perhaps a little bit demoralized arguing with other people on the left who think that your position is not as radical as theirs, is not as righteous and as pure as theirs is. It's very easy to squander a significant amount of time and energy arguing with folks who want to create an artificial hierarchy where they think that they are at the top of the most truly left and you must just be some lib. As if we don't need to partner with liberals, as if we don't need to partner with very normie centrist folks in the pursuit of the restoration of democracy. This constant need for a certain contingent of the left to make an ever smaller and smaller and smaller tent, exclude everybody who doesn't meet their ideological purity standards, that's not helping anybody. And I think we can spend a lot of time having arguments with other folks on the left and kind of cannibalizing our own energy, harming our own movement, wasting our own time. It's interesting, I got in a back and forth with Han. I don't know if any of y'all follow her. I used to follow her and I don't now. But she made the comment of me being upset with folks on the left who say that what happened at No King's Day or permitted protests are not real protests, they're not legitimate, and they don't do anything. That me taking issue with that is just me helping the fascists. Right, and I would actually say that no, it's the opposite of that. Folks on the left who want to call things like No King's Day a lib fest, like this person, seeing leftists call it lib fest makes me want to crush my phone with my bare hands. People on the left saying, well, what you did may have been some nice sign waving and a happy little march, but it's not a real protest. It's not going to get anything done. They fail to understand what the point of that protest was. And I don't actually think they've even asked folks, what was the point of No King's Day? What did you hope to accomplish? Did you meet your goals? It's just this immediate dismissal of like, it wasn't radical enough for me. You got permits? Well, then you're just cooperating with the man. Right, like it's failing to understand the reason that people get permits and also getting a permit with your local government while you stand up against the fascist federal government. Like, okay, making sure that you have permits so that streets are closed so that pedestrians can march safely without fear of getting overrun by cars. Making sure that you have permits so that there is access for emergency vehicles. Making sure that you get permits so the cops don't declare it a riot and come in and brutalize the most vulnerable members of your group. Sure, that makes your protest useless. That makes it not a real protest. It makes it entirely performative. But also, like, what do you think the point of marching is? What do you think the point of large-scale, very visible protests of millions and millions of people? Do you not understand that that is a performance when you say, it's just performative? Yeah, it's supposed to be performative. It's a performance. It's a public event meant to draw attention to your cause, meant to help other people find their courage and join you. It's also meant for the people who are participating in that event to boost their morale, to make community connections, to find other people, plug into organizations that are doing pro-democracy work. That's why when you go to events like these, there are folks tabling the DSA, Extinction Rebellion, local environmental groups, local mutual aid groups. There's almost always somebody there with a table on knowing your rights and how to resist ICE, how to protect yourself and your community from ICE. Right. Those events are about education. They're about morale boosting. They're about bringing people into the movement. They're about helping people level up to the next thing. But you know what? They were permitted, so they didn't serve any purpose at all. They were a complete waste of time. There's this competitive tendency, to be like, if you're not radical enough, if you're not extreme enough, that the action that you're taking is in some way too moderate for a certain contingent of the left, then it must be useless. And that's simply not true. Just because it didn't meet your expectations doesn't mean that it wasn't purposeful, useful, and efficacious. Just because it didn't look the way you wanted it to look, just because it wasn't radical and extreme enough, according to your little, artificial hierarchy, that doesn't mean that it wasn't useful. It doesn't mean that it doesn't further the movement. It doesn't mean that it wasn't legitimate. And I guess I just wonder, when folks like Han say that you can't argue with people who are offering a critique of permitted protests not being legit or No King's Day not doing anything. Yeah, I can offer a critique. That's not actually helping the fascists. I would argue that having a completely unnuanced take in which you say, that was pointless, that was useless. What are you doing? That, to me, seems to be helping the fascists. Because do you not understand that people have to enter into a movement somewhere? You have to meet them where they're at. Offering events that are approachable, that are legal, that is how you get people to take a risk for the first time. And we need millions and millions of people to step up for the first time ever. Saying, go spray paint an ice building and smash the doors in, that's not something that's going to be really approachable to the majority of Americans. And I think that's a failure that the left has consistently, is not understanding that you have to meet people where they're at. And maybe that's the benefit of like folks who've gone through deconstruction and remember where we were 20, 25 years ago. And we can say, okay, yeah, we're on a journey. Everybody else is on a journey. I can't expect people who are at a different place in their journey to jump in where I want them to right now today. I actually have to go to where they are, and I have to speak to their position right now, their ability, their perspective. I have to help lower the barrier of access for them, right? I have to make sure that the entry point is down here. I want them to be up here. I want them to be engaging up here. They're not going to jump in up here. I've got to make it so that they can step in here, and then we can help them level up and up and up. That's how effective organizing works. And honestly, when I see people online that say that there is no point in events like No King's Day, I feel like all they're doing is carrying water for the fascists. All they're doing is telling people what you're doing doesn't matter. It's pointless. Your sacrifice is not worth anything. They are spreading misinformation. They're demoralizing people. And it makes me wonder what their motivation is. That doesn't mean that there aren't valid critiques of how events like No King's Day, permitted protests, things that are accessible to everybody, disabled folks, elderly folks, children, things that are nonviolent and attempt to be peaceful. Nonviolent and peaceful are not the same thing. How those are insufficient on their own to get the job done. And I think there has been a significant amount of commentary over the last 2 days from certain folks on the left online that seem to fail to understand that the organizers of No King's Day, they are aware of that reality, that folks engaged in nonviolent resistance, they are aware of that reality. Nobody thinks that No King's Day was going to get Donald Trump to step down. Nobody thinks that in and of itself was the end all and be all, and that that's all that people have to do. I've already discussed this in multiple videos over the last 2 days. No King's Day was a resounding success. It accomplished multiple important goals. It has done more to draw attention to the pro-democracy movement in the United States than anything else that has been done thus far. It got more broad coverage here in the US and internationally than anything else that has been done thus far. And if you think that the pillars of support under Donald Trump are not paying attention to how massive that very visual display of ordinary, regular Americans, not radical activists, not just fringe folks on the left, but absolutely normal, centrist, liberals, and like also some conservatives, like how that event drew attention to the fact that it's regular people in the millions and the tens of millions, probably the hundreds of millions that are ready to stand up against Trump. Then you don't understand what the point of that event was. And just poo-pooing it online without bothering to examine the ways that it was extremely effective while insufficient on its own to get the job done. Like, I can't help but think that you are carrying water for Trump. Whether you want to be or not, you are doing work for him and his regime when you tell people that their small acts of resistance are pointless. That if it's not radical enough for you, that if it's not an act of civil disobedience, it won't do anything. It's that one, that's simply wrong. That's absolutely wrong. And two, I would argue that you are setting the movement back. You are actively harming the movement that you say you care about. If you want to fight the fascists, then why are you trying to demoralize people who are just entering into the movement for the first time? What we want to do is bring them alongside, say, yes, okay, awesome, well done. Now you're ready for the next step. You're ready to do the next thing. That's what community looks like. That's what bringing people alongside looks like. That's what mentoring looks like. Instead of saying like, this was pointless, didn't accomplish anything, wasn't radical enough for me. I'm way more radical than you are. I'm way more woke than you are. I've been here a lot longer than you are. I'm way more legitimate than you are. And what you did was nothing. But I'm going to sit here and, make a TikTok video criticizing you, but then not actually talk about ways that you can actively resist that are approachable and feasible for you and help bring more people into the movement, help push us closer towards success. Because honestly, I haven't seen any content like that. But to the rest of us and to me as well, I just spent 10 minutes on this. I'm done talking about this today. I have lots of other things I want to cover. I'm done getting bogged down in this kind of a discourse because honestly, I feel like it's a distraction at the end of the day. I just don't want other people to be demoralized by it. I don't want other people to be enraged. No King's Day accomplished what it meant to. They really do need to stop calling permitted sign wavings and parades protests. We still show up and provide material support, but they're not protests. Wow, that could not be more false of a statement. I also find it really interesting how there's a certain contingent of folks on the left who are so anxious to denigrate events that are created on purpose to be accessible to folks with disabilities, to children, to the elderly, to minority groups who might otherwise be targeted by law enforcement at a non-permitted event that is at risk of being called a riot. I find it interesting how the inclusive left is so anxious to denigrate events that are meant to help draw new people into the movement, that are meant to help reduce the barrier to access. It blows my mind that folks who say they are about working class solidarity denigrate events that are meant to help the majority of the working class access resistance against fascism for the very first time. I guess I just wonder what your goal is with comments like this. How does this help advance the pro-democracy movement? How does this help draw more folks in? How does this help folks find their courage and step out and take a risk for the first time? I get that No King's Day was not radical enough for you, but guess what? The majority of Americans are not radical people. The majority of Americans are pretty darn centrist. They're pretty unused to taking risks. They're pretty unused to standing up against authority at all. One of the main purposes of No King's Day was to help people find community, to plug into resistance, to connect with other people and build those coalitions and those support networks that are going to help us get through this. Honestly, if you think that people stepping out and taking a risk and connecting with other people, connecting with grassroots movements, building those connections, building community, if you think that that is not protest against a fascist regime, if you think that's not a protest against the system that we're in that says it's all about you as an individual and how you can profit, it's all about toxic individualism, what greater protest is there against that than to say, no, I'm going to lean into community. I'm going to purposefully seek out community. It's just that these protests don't look like how you want them to look, but they actually are protests. They actually are people accomplishing very, very important goals when it comes to building an active, effective resistance against fascism. If you say you care about the working class, you need to understand that the majority of the working class is not radical. The majority of the working class is never going to take up the work that you think constitutes real protest. It's incredibly dismissive and harmful to pretend that the work that those folks are doing is not real work at all, that their sacrifice is meaningless, that what they're doing is purely performative and it's not effectual. One, that's not true, but two, you are actively harming people, discouraging people from stepping into resistance when you play these kind of hierarchical purity, like I'm more radical, and if you don't do something as radical as I want to do, then you're not doing anything at all, kind of nonsense online. Like, don't do this. I would encourage you to ask yourself why it is that you think events that are meant to draw in and include the most vulnerable members of our society who are targeted by this regime, give them a voice, a platform, a chance to speak out and resist. Why that's not a real protest. Why the only kind of protest that you think is legitimate is one where the most able-bodied and most radical can show up and nobody else can participate. I understand that we on the left have a tendency to make these ever smaller and smaller tents where we shut out folks who don't want to do things exactly like we want to do them, who don't share our exact same values and perspective. We claim to be inclusive. We claim to want to advocate for all of the working class and every vulnerable person. And then we say shit like this. I'm going to shut out and exclude the majority of the working class from participating. I'm going to shut out and exclude folks with disabilities, folks who are the most targeted by this regime, from participating in effectual, active resistance because it doesn't look like how I think a real protest should look. I really want to encourage folks. I understand that most people who have this perspective earnestly want to make a better world and earnestly care about stopping the fascist regime of Donald Trump. Like, I understand that. But I would encourage you to think about what your goal is, how you are moving closer toward your goal by taking up this position. Is this about you and about how you feel like you are a real radical and you are more legit than these other folks who are maybe trying this out for the first time? It's not a hierarchy. Folks who are more experienced are not better. We need everybody. We need everybody to come to the party. We need everybody to give of what they have. We need everybody to step in right where they're at. We are not going to wait for them to become more radicalized. We have things that they can do now. They can have a meaningful contribution now. And actually, we need them to step in where they're at. We need to create events that are accessible to everybody so that people can enter and then start leveling up. Just like, please, please, please think about whether posting shit like this online and then thinking this way, having this mindset, this outlook, whether this is actually helpful in coalition building, whether this is actually helpful about getting us to where we need to be, whether this is actually going to take us closer toward toppling the fascist regime of Donald Trump and getting justice and accountability for the awful illegal things they're doing now. Think about whether this mindset is actually protecting vulnerable lives. What are your goals? How is this helping you meet them? How is this building the broad-based coalition of millions and millions and millions of people that we need to get the job done? When you want to go and call for that general strike, but you've told all of the normie, centrist, working class people all around the country, what you're doing isn't real protest. What you do doesn't matter. I'm legit. I'm radical. How are you going to get those people on board with your general strike? How are you going to get those people to agree to do what you want and take those steps when you shut them down and told them that what they're doing is performative and doesn't matter? Okay, that's enough of that for me today. I'm really frustrated with the quantity of this kind of mentality that I'm seeing online from folks on the left. Okay, that's enough for me today on this subject. I'm really frustrated with how many comments I have seen along these lines today. And I feel like at this point, it's a distraction. I know I have work to do. And like a lot of online discourse with tankies or off left, skunk ape, I'm not saying that you are one of those, or with folks who feel that their form of activism, their leftist ideology is the only acceptable one or the truly radical one. I feel like this kind of headache-inducing online discourse with folks like that becomes a big time suck very quickly. So I'm going to step away and get back to the work that I need to do today. And I want y'all to know, if you're watching this, if you see comments like this online and you saw the videos saying that if it's permitted, it's not a real protest, your contributions matter. You stepping in where you are and engaging in this kind of work for the first time, that really, really matters. You doing something that other people see as small and insufficient, like fuck them. You step in where you're at. You do what it feels accessible to you, and that is perfectly valid. Your contribution at No King's Day, what that event meant to you personally, but what it meant on a broader scale to the movement, that absolutely matters. It absolutely was real. It absolutely was legitimate. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I feel like these folks, this is the folks who are saying that permitted protests are not real protests. These folks don't consider that the disabled, the elderly, the infirm all deserve to have their voices heard as well, and that it is simply not possible for these folks to engage in direct action at other protests. I think it actually goes further than this, right? Absolutely. Permitted events are meant to be inclusive of disabled folks, the elderly, children, folks who are being targeted by this regime and deserve to have a chance to stand up and be seen and heard. But it also means that you are prioritizing the safety of the folks who attend, right? So you're making sure that you have set up so that ambulances can get in if you have protesters who are injured or fall ill. You make sure that roads are closed so that your marchers are safe from traffic. Folks marching at inclusive permitted events like No King's Day, those are real protests. Delegitimizing them seems like a very weird hierarchical choice to me, but also like they aren't the only kind of protest that we should engage in. They're not the only kind of direct action. They're not the only form of resistance that we need to be taking up. And not all forms of protest are going to be accessible to all people. Not all kinds of resistance are going to be ones that you have the skills, the time, the ability to engage in. That doesn't mean that there aren't different kinds of resistance that you can and should be taking up, like literally on a daily basis. Someone else's contribution is going to look very different than yours, and I don't think it's helpful in any way for folks on the left to delegitimize somebody else's actions just because you want to do something more radical or something that is more aligned with civil disobedience. Good for you. That's awesome that you feel capable of taking that on, but not everybody is you. Not everybody is entering into this work from the same position that you are. Not everybody is physically or in other ways capable of doing the same things that you are doing. It doesn't mean that their work is pointless. It doesn't mean that it's performative. It doesn't mean that you are legitimate and they are not. It doesn't mean that you are more radical and so therefore you are a real activist. You really care about defeating fascism and they don't, or like that they are somehow not contributing meaningfully and effectively to the work that we are all doing. It takes all of us doing what we're capable of. It takes a diversity of events and tactics and strategies in order to stop fascism. We need a broad-based solidarity movement of tens of millions of people. So if you are creating events where only taking significant risks with your body, only able-bodied people are able to participate, you're excluding the most heavily targeted by this regime. You are absolutely limiting yourself and you are shutting out the folks that you need to join your coalition. So again, our actions and our choices, how are those getting us closer to the goals that we have set forth? Broad-based coalition that makes sure that we have events and activities that are inclusive of everybody, regardless of their ability or their position, regardless of their politics, y'all. We need people who are not radical leftists. We need people who are not socialists. We need people who are not DSA. We need people who are like run-of-the-mill liberals. We need people who are centrist. We need people who have not cared about politics at all before now. All of those people. We need anybody who is willing to stand up against fascism. There's a place for everybody. And I'm sorry, but like denigrating and devaluating other people's contributions because they don't look how you want them to look, not helpful. We need a big tent. I know leftists, we love to make smaller and smaller and smaller tents. Right now we need a big tent. Bring everybody in. Make sure that there are events that are accessible to everybody. I literally saw someone complaining that normies were there at the No King's Day protest. Yeah, exactly. Who do you think the majority of the working class is, y'all? They're normie centrists. Are you trying to organize for working class solidarity, but you want to exclude like 99% of the working class? You don't understand who it is who needs to stand up against the fascist regime of Donald Trump? Do you want it to be only people who have your particular brand of radical leftism that you think is radical enough for you? God forbid normal, everyday working class people decide that they have had it up to here with fascism and they will no longer tolerate the cruelty of this regime. God forbid they step out and try to defend their own rights and the rights of those who are impacted, targeted by this regime. All the normies, all the libs, all the centrists come to the party. Your contributions matter. You are needed. There's a place for you in the resistance against fascism.